Imagine this, it's 2017 and one of the most famous horror icons of all time has finally slashed its way into the multiplayer gaming scene. Friday the 13th, the game drops, and overnight Jason Voorhees becomes the star of the one and the most intense asymmetrical survival horror experiences players have ever seen. Fans of the franchise were ecstatic. For the first time, you could step into the shoes of camp counselors desperately trying to survive, or, even better, become Jason himself, hunting down victims one by one in gruesome fashion. The hype was real. It had potential to become a juggernaut, but now the game has practically disappeared. Servers are gone, the player base has evaporated, and for most people, Friday the 13th, the game, is nothing more than just a memory, a dead campfire where the fire once burned so bright. So what happened here? Why did a game with such a strong foundation, such passionate fans, and one of the most iconic horror properties in history completely vanish from the scene? This is Ben, and today, let's put on our detective hats and piece together the mystery behind the rise and fall of Friday the 13th, the game. Remember to like and subscribe, and keep a peace of mind, but for now, let's go to the camp. Going back into the late 2010s, asymmetrical horror was just starting to boom. Dead by Daylight had launched in 2016, and though it was smaller back then, it set the stage for this kind of multiplayer survival. Gun Media, a relatively small studio, saw an opportunity. They teamed up with IllFonic to bring Jason and the legendary Friday the 13th franchise into the mix with other games. And honestly, it was a dream come true. The game nailed the atmosphere, the eerie forest, the rundown cabins, and the sound design that made your heart pound when Jason was ever so near you. Fans loved that it was authentic to the films. Kane Hodder, the actor who famously played Jason in multiple movies, even returned to do motion capture. The kills were brutal, straight out of the films, and no two matches ever quite felt the same. For horror fans, it felt like the perfect storm, the right game at the right time with the right franchise behind it. This wasn't just another licensed cash grab, it was Friday the 13th brought to life in a way fans had always wanted, but never truly got. But just like in the movies, good things don't always last long when Jason shows up. Now here's where the detective work really begins. Most games that fail, it's usually because of poor gameplay, lack of updates, or bad monetization. But Friday the 13th, the game, had a much bigger monster lurking in the shadows. Legal battles. The rights to Friday the 13th franchise were and still are in a messy fight between Victor Miller, the original screenwriter of the 1980s horror film, and Screen Cunningham, the film's producer. Miller argued that since he was the writer, he deserved the rights back. Cunningham, however, disagreed, and what followed was a long and drawn-out lawsuit over who actually owned Jason and the world around him. And because of this fight, Gun Media suddenly couldn't release any new content for the game. No new maps, no new Jasons, no new counselors, nothing. The devs were completely handcuffed. Imagine being a developer with all these ideas, fan requests, and planned content, and then being told you legally can't touch your game anymore. That's exactly what happened here. For a live service game, this was a death sentence. Fans expect updates, they expect new content to keep the game fresh. Without it, interest starts to die. But the lawsuit wasn't the only knife in the back. Even before the legal issues, players had noticed the game was a little unstable. Server crashes, bugs, glitches, where Jason would teleport through the map where players would get stuck, and connection issues plagued the experience. Gun Media was a small team, and while they did their best to patch things up, the game never really shook off its rough edges. Add in the lack of new content thanks to the lawsuit, and suddenly the cracks started widening. Meanwhile, Dead by Daylight was going stronger and stronger every single day. Behavior Interactive, the developers of Dead by Daylight, were free to add tons of new killers, survivors, and maps. They even brought in over crossover characters from Halloween, Stranger Things, Silent Hill, and plenty of other franchises. Every new update pulled more players away from Friday the 13th and more towards Dead by Daylight. It wasn't long before Friday the 13th felt like the smaller, forgotten cousin of a much more successful franchise. Fast forward a few years, by 2018, GUD Media officially announced that they couldn't make any more content due to the lawsuit. In 2020, they shut down dedicated servers, and then in 2023, it was announced that Friday the 13th, the game, would be permanently dislisted, meaning new players couldn't even buy it anymore. Think about that for a second. A game that had once so much potential, ones that fan poured time into, just erased. It wasn't because the developers didn't care. It wasn't even because the players abandoned it completely. It was because the game was trapped in a legal nightmare it could never escape from. It's rare in gaming to see a title completely killed off, not because of failure in design, but because of something entirely out of the developer's hands. And that's part of what makes this case so tragic. Today, Friday the 13th the game exists only in memories, in fan clips on YouTube, and in the stories of the players who remember the chaotic matches with friends. It had the potential to grow into a long-lasting series, maybe even rival Dead by Daylight if things had gone differently. But instead, it became a cautionary tale, a game that disappeared not because it was bad, but because it was shackled by forces it couldn't fight. Much like Jason chasing his victims, the game couldn't outrun its own fate. And here's the final piece of the puzzle. Despite the lawsuits, despite the shutdown, despite everything that went wrong, players still talk about it fondly. In a way, Friday the 13th the game succeeded in one thing that matters most, capturing the heart of the franchise and giving fans an experience they'll never forget, even if it's gone. So when we ask, what really happened to Friday the 13th the game, the answer is both simple and tragic. Legal disputes bled the game dry, technical problems weakened it, competition from Dead by Daylight finished the job, and in the end, it disappeared from the spotlight. But like any good horror story, the legend lives on, and who knows, maybe one day, when the rights are untangled, Jason will rise again in a new game, ready to terrorize players all over again. But until then, Friday the 13th the game remains a ghost of what it could have been. A chilling reminder that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't in the game, they're in the courtroom. This is the end of the video. Remember to like and subscribe. It's Ben, and I will see you guys next time. See ya!
Luces bajas, nadie fala. Tus ojos gritan lo que tu boca cala. Silencio tenso.